It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce you to two people who really keep PDXWIT feeling like what it is. I'm so grateful for both of them every day. I have Crystal Sincoff and Hazel Valdez. They are the leaders of our LGBTQ plus in tech group here at PDXWIT, and they have put together this amazing panel for you. So welcome.
Hey, thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Dawn.
I am so excited to be here tonight with all of you fabulous folks on this first night of Pride. Yay! My name, as Dawn said, is Crystal. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am super proud to co-facilitate PDXWIT's LGBTQ plus in tech series with my wife, Hazel. We are coming up on our 8th wedding anniversary in July, which is super exciting for me. And when not facilitating these events, I work as a senior manager of workplace experience, diversity, equity, and inclusion for a local software company called Approved, where I am in charge of all things equity and inclusion and workplace experience. I'm also a member of the PDXWIT board and like to help out wherever I can to connect folks in the community, whether it's with PDXWIT or throughout Portland and beyond. So I'm really excited to be here with our guest tonight, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Hazel to do her introduction.
Hello, everyone. Happy Pride. Thank you so much for being with us here today. It is an honor and always a pleasure to be co-hosting or co-facilitating with my wife in the LGBTQ plus series that we do for PDXWIT. During the day, or as my wife said, my day job, I am the Associate Director for the Oregon Bioscience Incubator, and what all that means is I work with a bunch of brilliant scientists who became entrepreneurs and are now at our incubator, creating and iterating a product into product development and hopefully commercialization in order to continue the bioscience, biotech economic system here for the state of Oregon. I'm also a PDXWIT ambassador, love doing things with PDXWIT whenever I can, as well as board secretary for Saturday Academy. With that, I would actually like to introduce or at least bring on the panelists onto the screen here, and we're going to have Katy Byrtus start us off on their intro.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hazel. Happy anniversary, y'all. Didn't know that we would get to celebrate. That's really sweet and really meaningful on the first day of Pride Month. Excuse me. So I'm Katy Byrtus, she, her pronouns. I'm the workforce solutions partner at Sender, where I support our EDI programming, both internally and externally. I manage events and sales. I'm a cis white queer woman in her 30s. I have short brown and pink hair, and I'm wearing glasses and a lavender dress with a black scarf. Community building and bringing people together is something I've done since I was young. I learned this from my mom, who unfortunately has never been the best cook. Sorry, Mom, but she sure knows how to plan a party. And I'm usually moderating these conversations, so this is a treat to be on the other side. Thanks so much for having me. And Salome, would love to hear more about you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Salome, or Salome Chimuku. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a Black queer woman, and I work at Espousal Strategies, which is a consulting firm here in Portland, Oregon, that focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion work, along with job development and business management. And I am so happy to be here. My background is in mostly activism as well as in public policy. And I will pass it over to DeAngelo.
I should probably come off mute. I did not get the memo about the gray hair, Salome and Katy, so I love the color of the hair today. You all are rocking it. So my name is DeAngelo Crane, and I've been working in the diversity, inclusion, and belonging space for the last 17 years, really helping corporate organizations have a deeper understanding of what belonging means to them, and also really continuing to figure out how do I get engaged in communities and working with communities who need to better understand what does belonging mean for LGBTQIA+ people of color within their community. So that's the work I've been doing and will continue to do. I'm based out of Washington, D.C. now, which I love being here. And shout out to all my great friends on the phone from all the different places I lived at. So excited about today's conversation.
All right. I think with that, we're going to get going with the questions. So, love will keep us together is the theme. First question. Is it a time to celebrate, or is it a time to celebrate differently? How can you share your activism and support differently? Let's start with Katy on this one.
Thanks, Hazel. I have to admit, I was really struggling when we met as a group to prepare for the event with feeling like celebrating. I was in a place, as I'm sure a lot of people have been, that I was processing and grieving, as we all have been with recent events and in our personal lives. And so I've shifted that a bit. Y'all help me with that. Thank you. And while I do believe we should absolutely celebrate ourselves, our community, our queerness, something that I wasn't looking forward to was the LinkedIn feeds going rainbow today, to the corporatization of our identities. It's challenging for me, even as an EDI practitioner, as someone who works in employer branding, to see the visibility of pride in corporate spaces when it tends to be held in higher regard than the humans in our community. And so, while yes, I will absolutely be at the House of Ada Ball on Friday the 17th. See y'all there. We must also take a page out of history and from Stonewall and continue to fight for our rights, both inside and outside of our workspaces. And so, again, I was reminded by y'all that we must celebrate each other and ourselves. And so that's my commitment to y'all this month, that I'm going to celebrate me, I'm going to celebrate y'all, and I'll continue to produce queer joy and not hide that, and continue to be visible.
Katy, I really appreciate you for being vulnerable and sharing with us in our practice session, because it made me really think about this question. And it lends back to a song by James Brown called "I'm Black and I'm Proud." And he wrote this song, his friend tells the story, he wrote this song on a napkin after some unrest in Los Angeles in 1968. And I think back to that, and what makes me think of three things when we think about celebrating. I think at first we must acknowledge, right, that why are we celebrating? And we must acknowledge the trauma that happens oftentimes when we're celebrating these cultural holidays, right? When we think about Pride and Black History Month and even Women's Month, right? What does that mean for us, right? So we got to acknowledge that the weight of it. We need to hold space for that trauma that we may be enduring at that moment or may be experiencing, right? But I think that's the first step, is really to acknowledge it and that emotional weight and hold space for it. And then next is really appreciate, right? So it's really about appreciating that we've overcome some things, right? That we've made it this far, that we've done some really great things in our communities to get this far. We wouldn't have gotten this far if we just given up and didn't think about marriage equality. We wouldn't have that today, right? So it's really about saying, I acknowledge the past, but I'm appreciating where we are right now, and then really about taking action as the last step, right? So when I think about celebrating, especially these types of events and these types of occasions, if you think about Juneteenth, we celebrated Juneteenth, but then we finally said we got to take action and make it a holiday now, right? So we observed that. So that's why I just want to say, when I think about celebrating, is really understanding what that means for you, and you can have multi-layers to it, like you said, Katy. And sometimes it means that you're in that acknowledging phase. Sometimes it means you're in that appreciating phase. Sometimes you're in the action phase. And if you're like me or any of us on the call, you're probably in all three phases of it, right? At any given point. So, and the work that we do, it forces us to really be in all three phases at any given moment, right? And to hold space for that. So that's why I would just say, when you're celebrating, hold space for all of those three areas to acknowledge, appreciate, and take some action. Salome, what do you think about it?
I mean, y'all already said most of my answers, so I'm just going to sit here and nod in the queerest way possible. But I'm also going to say that I feel like when it comes to the idea around celebrating any sort of commemorative holiday, it's around how do you make it as personal as possible, because that's what it comes down to, is the personal level. I don't think there's a wrong way to celebrate. If it's what speaks to you, then that's what speaks to you. If your version of Pride is you're gonna go and have family time and sit with your kids, that's great. If your version of Pride looks more like mine, that includes booty shorts and crop tops, all for it too. There's no wrong way to really celebrate the folks that are in your life that are LGBTQI+. And I also think that the more personal you make it and genuine you make it, the more meaningful it will be. Because I think day in and day out, I like to think of Pride as like every queer person's birthday. And so I just go around to every queer person I know and just pretend it's their birthday all over again and be like, what do you want to do? Let's go have some fun. You want to go to protests? Let's do that. I also check in with myself. What do I feel like doing? What do I want to do to acknowledge this month? And so I don't really think there's a wrong way to go about it. I think the only wrong way to go about it is when you force yourself to do something that doesn't speak to you.
I would agree with you. I want to tell you that I was wearing my Hoochie Daddy shorts this weekend, so I understand what you're saying.
Look, pictures or it didn't happen. Pictures or it didn't happen, sir.
Yeah, I think what you said, Salome, is so true about doing what's right for you in the moment. And that could change every day. One day you could be wearing your booty shorts and the next day you're like, I just need to curl up and read a book about whatever that will be to get you centered. I think that's really difficult in times like this to do that. So as a leader, I'm going to start with you, Salome. What do you do to support your community both at work and out in the world?
So I think to celebrate, obviously support the community at work and everywhere else. It's not lost on me that my work is doing just that. I think that my biggest drive is to create a safe space, a space in which people not only feel like they can participate, but a space in which they feel more empowered than when they entered. And if that means that they felt so empowered by whatever we were doing at Espousal, that they went off to the next project or the next thing and was like, how do I get involved? How do I speak my voice? Then I think that we all think that's a job well done. And I think that in my community, it has led to me reaching out more intentionally to people in spaces that I meet, especially those who are not from the area, those who haven't found their chosen family, those who may not have had the experiences I have had. And so I just try to figure out a way that creates a safe space for people to be themselves, but also a space in which people feel like they can just be. I think there's a lot of pressure to always grow, to always move forward, to always press. But I think there needs to be space for just having the right to exist for existing's sake. And so that's just kind of my goals when I move through work in the community. I will pass it over to DeAngelo.
Well, I want to say I agree with everything you said. I think when I think about the work that I've been doing, it's teaching people what does a safe space mean for other people and how do you get there. So we know if you read any article in 2020, it was about every leader needed to start leading with empathy and vulnerability. So that's what we really started doing at the organizations I was working with at the time, is going on these, creating these spaces where associates could come together and share and really almost pushing leaders into this space of vulnerability and saying, hey, you got to strip away your leader hat and put on your human being hat and listen and connect with people differently than you had before, right? And once we had built this open space for vulnerability, then it was like, okay, now you also have to build empathy with that. Not only do you have to understand, it was easy for leaders to have empathy for COVID, much more difficult for them to say, how do we have empathy for racial trauma that was going on? And so then we had to really stretch them even more to say, yes, you have to hold space for that as well. And so not just to say that we have safe spaces, or we're gonna, because companies say it all the time, this is a safe space, but are they really doing the work to create safe spaces? And so that's what we're really, what I've been really working on, is making sure that we're creating this space, that we're saying, what does it mean to be a safe space within our organization? What does it look like for everyone in here to show up in a space where they can share and respect with everyone? is enduring, and what does it also mean for an employee to be vulnerable with you, leader, right? To say, I'm hurting today, I'm not feeling like I can't bring my best self to work today, and I need you to respect that. And the leader says, okay, because what we know about belonging is that employees who are fully can be themselves at work have a higher sense of belonging and engagement within their organizations, right? And that leads to higher productivity. So how do we help leaders to understand that all of this is tied together with getting the best out of our organizations? And so I did a lot of that work within organizations, but outside of the organization, what I'm doing now is really exciting. I joined a youth organization here in DC called SMILE, and their work is really to work with LGBTQ youth in the community. And many of their youth are youth of color. And so one of the things that, so I was excited about that. But then I went to a donor event, and in the room of the donors, there was probably about 150 people there, and only maybe about 25 of them were people of color. And so what my goal right now is to really work with that organization to talk about what different types of events do we need to curate to bring in more donors and more people of color who are people just who want to volunteer or connect with the youth that you are serving within our community. So that's really how I'm looking at it internally and externally. So Katie, what about you? I would love to hear how you're working with the great work you're doing.
Thanks, DeAngelo. Yeah, I think what both of you said really resonated around Salome, like create a space that they left feeling more empowered really resonates with me. And I think that something that I naturally do, and like I don't hide any of my queerness. I show up as my full self because I have that privilege and that safety, recognizing that not everyone does. I push boundaries on conversations. I talk about my partner. I use her pronouns. I use it not only internally, but in client meetings, in larger discussions, in spaces where people might be like, oh, you probably shouldn't do that. Like, fuck it, who cares? Like, normalize our lives as like all other lives have been normalized, too. And so, I think that's something that I do a lot in the workspace, and in my own community. Like, my community is queer. And so making sure that, folks that are new to town, folks that are looking for connection, folks that are like, where do I find my queers? Like, being able to help connect people is a big thing that I do regardless of sexuality and gender. And it's something that's really important to me, especially within the queer community. And just lastly, in the workspace, I always seek out my queer coworkers too. Like, I see you, I'm here. What do you need? Let's do this together.
I'm going to say, I'm going to date myself a little and say, I just usually do the lesbian nod. I don't know what that is for some people, but for Crystal, who knows I do this, it's like, hey, what's up?
Hazel, we had a discussion about this. I have to tell you that Black people do that too, right? And then I was on a call with our Asian Pacific Islander. They did a panel discussion, and she said the same thing. She was like, I do the nod, and it bothers me when people don't nod back. So I totally understand where you're coming from with the head nod.
And I do it with, like, my Asian community. I just do it in general. But,
it's an acknowledgement nod. It's a
good one.
It depends on what the person who's seeing your nod sees.
It's like, tipping the hat when you walk by someone, or it's things like that. And then this is a good way to segue into the third question here. We're going to talk about microaggressions. So in 2021, a study conducted by McKinsey found that 76% of LGBTQ+ men and 82% LGBTQ+ women have experienced microaggressions at work. For all of you, what are some ways and or programming have you created and enacted to support and provide tools for your colleagues? Let's start with DeAngelo.
Thanks, Hazel. I think what I've learned in working in this field is that we had to really get away from training and move into developmental experiences that we're going to build connections for leaders, right? And so what that really looks like is a multi-level approach. So it was these kind of workshops for leaders to experience what it means to, you know, diversity 101, right? And LGBTQ and all those things 101, okay? So we did go through that. But also what we're going through now is also how do we make sure some of those leaders who are allies, are executive sponsors of our employee resource councils and employee resource groups? How do we also get them into listening sessions and focus groups with employees who don't look like them? How do we also then take them through allyship? What does allyship look like? And how do we define that for our organization and what it means to be an ally for everyone in our organization? What does it mean to build belonging? So we really moved away from just the traditional training of leaders, right? Because it was like, how do we just train them on diversity, to moving into how do we develop better behaviors, right? How do we, you know, I used to say it's about changing hearts and minds, but Hiba, my new leader, would tell us we're changing behaviors. And I can rally around that because when we think about behavior changes, those are long-term impacts, right? And when we all define as an organization what behaviors do we want to have within the organization, then we can move in the same road together. We can say we're on the same street and we all believe in this, and this is what we all value. So I think that's really where the shifting is, and the tools that I've been working on the building is how do we change behaviors of leaders, how do we connect them to this work, and how do we also all understand that we all need allies at one point in our job, in our career, right? And so how do we move the needle on that? And then that's the work right there. And so that's what I've been doing. Salome, what about you? What kind of tools and resources have you been creating?
So I think that for me, it's using and utilizing tools that we already have in a way that works better than they were ever intended to work. One of the things that I think about is the fact that even pre-COVID, I had been working with Zoom a lot because at the time I needed a lot of public records about meetings that folks were having and all of that stuff. And one of the things that I think has made people shift their behavior is that in Zoom, we were seeing more and more people putting their pronouns after their name. We're seeing more and more in emails, people having little features to where you can hear how someone's name is pronounced. So you can practice before you even get in a room with them. And I think making those things mandatory as opposed to what they are used now, which is for queer people to out themselves or for people with foreign names to be like, let me help you out, but more so that it's something that everyone has to do, even if your name is something so simple, to just do it. And just having that expectation that that is where we're at right now. Having that expectation that once we even do get back into person, that we're still going to be asking people what their pronouns are in meetings when we're meeting with them, because we won't have those indicators. And I think that those are some of the simple steps. I think long-term goals, it's going to be asking questions that are important to everyone in this space. I know that for our company, we were looking for an office space because we started just before the pandemic, and most of us were hired during the pandemic. And going to an office space, it took staff being comfortable enough to ask those hard questions of like, are there gender neutral bathrooms in this building? Or in my case, what are the accommodations for this building when it comes to service animals? Is there greenery around for my service animal? And those conversations being seen as fundamental questions and not private questions you ask your boss one-on-one, but more so questions that are asked of the group by the group and standards that we hold for ourselves. And so I think that it's going to be us holding ourselves to a higher standard, us making these questions facing towards dominant culture as opposed to those who are on the margins to accommodate. And then lastly, using the tools that we have in front of us in ways in which we've never used them before to create a new norm and a new set of standards that we all work and apply by. And I don't know about you, Katie, but what are you doing in some of the workspaces that you're at? Because I'm not surprised about these numbers at all in terms of microaggressions.
Yeah, I remember at one of my workspaces, I was asked, and this wasn't too long ago, and it was Pride Month, and I think I didn't even realize it was June 1st yet or something. And this person said, "Oh, are you excited for your parade?" And I was like, what are they talking? It took me forever to figure out what they were talking about. So no, the numbers don't surprise me. And also we can laugh about it later with some of them. And I think something that we are doing and must continue doing is producing conversations and content that is focusing on systemic issues. And so providing education beyond this 101 of what are pronouns, what does LGBTQ stand for? Like, how did we get to here today? Why did Stonewall happen? Why do we have these exclusionary laws? Why did we have to fight for marriage equality? Like, how did we get here and how can we move forward? If we don't understand the history at play, then we won't be able to actually make lasting, meaningful change. And something that that I've been working on, which is how I met DeAngelo for the last couple of years, is producing almost monthly conversations with folks across the LGBTQ continuum, across race and ability and veteran status, and having letting them share their story and share what they want to share in a way that feels meaningful for them, in a way that can be educational for community. And I think that that's really important. The more that we have these conversations as queer folks, as people of color, as disabled folks, that we allow other people in to hear of our experiences, I think the ultimate goal and hope is that it's going to increase empathy and increase allyship and increase activism. And so as we are doing these things, to something that I keep hearing is designing with equity in mind. If you're not designing with equity at the forefront, then throw it out and try again. So is it equitable for everyone that needs to come through this and access it? How does everyone get here? Yeah, I could keep going, but one of the resources I want to share is anything Alok, and I'm sure Crystal and Hazel have wonderful resources from Alok to share too.
Alok is amazing, an amazing activist, and we just saw them on Sunday night. They were here in Portland. Definitely follow them if you get a chance. And I'm really thinking about, when we're thinking about tools and resources, and having this conversation about this hybrid kind of world we're coming into or waking up into after the past couple of years. And I think holding community can be difficult. It was difficult in virtual world, and it's going to be even, I think, trickier in this hybrid world where we have folks who are still coming in virtually and folks coming in person. And how are we going to navigate that? Have any of you thought about how we can incorporate that into, so that folks don't get left behind? I was going to start with you, Salome.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we have been thinking about. I have been thinking about, especially considering that most of my work is community engagement. And has been. And as we move and are moving into a hybrid space, I think one of the things that I find myself having to focus on is recentering folks on the idea that there are other people in the room besides them, and that other people show up to other spaces differently. And so when it comes to not leaving folks behind, you know, I oftentimes try to get people to see the flip side of either something that's great for them or something that's bad for them. So with some folks who are like, it's finally so great to be in person and get to be around people again, my response is like, well, there are still some folks who are autoimmune compromised and other folks who have limited mobility that they will not be still able to come in person. And having the Zoom up still is helpful for them to participate. Also thinking about, you know, the idea of screen fatigue. I know that that is a real thing for people I know that myself, I have migraines, and so some days screens are not my friend. And so having people be okay with some folks having their camera off, it can be really a struggle. Having to, I guess, just remind people that there's other ways of existing that exist, and that someone doing something to take care of themselves is not necessarily a personal affront to you as a person. Like, just because my screen is off does not mean that like I don't want to engage with you. It could just mean that my eyes hurt, or it could very well mean I don't want to engage with you and that I just don't want you to see my face. But the idea is whatever we're doing to make sure that we can still show up in space is important. And if someone's taking the time to show up, whether it be virtually or in person, needs to be acknowledged, needs to be celebrated, needs to be appreciated. And I think that moving forward, to make sure that no one is left behind, I think learning the lessons and hearing the feedback and seeking out feedback of what people liked about some of the Zoom spaces, to make sure that we keep some of that. Even something as small as how you orient a room. I know that I facilitated a meeting where we had a Zoom space, and unlike most of the time where the TV is like next to the table, we had everyone sit in a semicircle facing the TV. So that way they had to look at the camera, and people felt like who were coming in virtually that they could see everybody for one, but they could also be seen, and people could recognize when someone had their hand raised in the Zoom room. And it was like as if they had a chair right there, right? But it's like 12 people. And so those are some small things that I think about when it comes to how do we not leave anyone behind when we're moving into a hybrid space and value everyone's time and presence. What about you, Katie?
+1 to all of those things. And I think space and grace, I think, is what we have to allow ourselves and our communities as we are figuring out how to reintegrate. Our lives have completely changed in the last 2 years. They won't ever be the same. We'll never be in that quote unquote normal, which wasn't normal in the first place. And so what I want people to remember is the conversations that we had about not going back to that quote unquote normal. Like, remember those things. And we are still going through an intense amount of collective trauma and grief. And so how are we asking folks what they need in these spaces? How are we being accommodating to our friends that need to go off screen? How are we checking ourselves if we are feeling some type of way that you join but via phone versus with your face on, you know? And so the biggest thing is just, we're not going back to normal. Please remember that. And please, you know, engage with folks in the spaces you're in. And when I've been to a couple like happy hours in person networking things, they're super overwhelming for me. They were before, they are now, like, and so if you see folks along the outside, like looking like they need someone to talk to, go talk to them. Yeah. And call people in on Zoom, like just all the things we've been doing. And just please remember that we don't want to go back to what we were before. DeAngelo?
Yeah, +1 to all of that. I mean, and I think we also have to get real with ourselves that many Black and brown people, many of them don't want to go back into the office because of the microaggressions you all just talked about, right? That they're experiencing at LGBTQ people. Like, we don't want to have to experience that. So we're like, we like this new environment. Now, I will tell you, I'm the one in a million Black gay person that loves going into the office and was excited when I got my new job and I was able to go in the office a couple days a week.
You look at this teacher's pet, just over there reminding people we had homework and stuff. Like, why you gotta call us out like we're the guys who don't want to go to work? And you're just like, oh well, you know, I'm happy to. It's not me though. It's Salome and us. They ain't trying to go back.
I can't put on my work clothes. I can't put on my work clothes, but I'm gonna try to be there. Okay, but yes, so I do. You're right. I can't be some of that. So I think we gotta make sure we hold space for that, understanding that. And then I think we just gotta really. Another thing is that my favorite quote is that. It's by Maya Angelou. People may not remember what you said or what you did, but they will always remember the way you make them feel. And so when I think about that, is that how do we want people to treat us? So how might we think about how do we treat our colleagues? I mean, I did a whole campaign once on just check in. All leaders had to do for a whole month was just reach out to one associate that they had never talked to once a week. And they came back with all of these great insights and thoughts and sharing about the employees that they met. And it just was the art of the check-in. I would say one of the most beneficial conversations I ever had with the leader was that I lived in Charlotte and there was a police shooting of a young Black male. And she just said, "How are you doing today?" That's how she started our one-on-one. And that created such a great space for us to engage in that conversation and also have a meaningful work environment with one another. So I would say that, like I said, the tool is just let's do the art of the checking in and holding space for people to say, "I'm fatigued today, I may need to take a break." The other thing is let's start having more fun, right? I think we got to really just be intentional about the fun. When I came to my new company, one of the things that they love to do is trivia nights. And I'm always like, oh, another trivia night. But for them, the employees love trivia nights, right? I can't go to all of them, but I do try to go to some of them. But if that's what's needed for employees to connect with one another on a different level, then that's what we got to do. So it goes back to what you both said, is meeting people where they are and meeting people where they are in this new space, right? In this new safe space that we're saying we want to create. And creating safe spaces means that people are comfortable, whatever that looks like to them. And sometimes that may mean, I don't want to get on camera today. Can you hold space for me? But next week, if you ask me to prepare and do my hair, I will get on camera, right? So it's today, if you want me on camera, is it okay if I wear my sweatshirt and t-shirt, right? And no one will judge me and we have space for that. So how do we make some new team commitments and some new team goals and how we're going to work together in this new virtual space with one another and respect that? So yeah, that's what I really think. The art of the check-in is probably one of my biggest things that I ask leaders to do, and I see it over and over again.
The art of the check-in is pretty much something every leader should do, in my view of the world. Here's why, for me anyway. I worked with a CEO whose job it is every week was to roam the hallways within our company, take different routes because people caught on, and getting the list from our HR team, our talent team, and finding the new people. And then after he's gone through all of that, did it again with the next batch, and then circling back with the other folks he just met. So that way, and I kid you not, this man remembered 543 names at our town hall meeting or at some big celebration for the company. So although we're in a virtual world, the art of the check-in still really applies. And I don't want to go back to whatever that normal was, because it's not. And I'm going to challenge everyone in this room to say that there's no such thing as a new normal. It is. This is the way we work. This is how we are going to move economies, virtual or in person. It makes no difference, because we proved to the powers of whoever that may be that we actually can work in the virtual world. Yes, we want community. Yes, we want some in-person things. But at the end of the day, if I'm feeling spent and I've got no more time on this Zoom thing. I mean, Crystal did a whole thing on dead but be gone, Zoom fatigue, and what that looks like. So that alone, just think about what new leadership looks like for everyone. I'm going to do a time check. I have one more question for everyone, and there is a really great question in the Q&A that I would like to address. So let me go with this question right now, and then we'll go on to audience participation Q&A. So we're always reminded that when June rolls around, it's Pride Month. And I want to ask all of you, what do you do to make sure that Pride is celebrated in your communities year round? DeAngelo, let's start with you.
Get myself off mute here. Okay. For me, it's really about two things. A is how do we cultivate these spaces, right? And so how do we make sure that wherever we are, I'm blessed to live in DC, where they embrace and almost cater to the LGBTQ+ community. But even still, I always am thinking about how do I cultivate spaces. I am known to have events in my house probably once a month. When I lived in Phoenix, I helped to create a group of that went from 40 LGBTQ people of color to now 200, almost 300 now that I'm gone. But needless to say is about how do we cultivate these spaces on our own, right? And then the other thing is how do we just create these spaces? I think about Bayard Rustin, who helped Dr. Martin Luther King with the March on Washington, and then went on to do many great things in the LGBTQ community. But he didn't wait. I think about if we waited for people to say, we're gonna bring you in, we might not have gotten anywhere as quickly as we have, right? So I think about, I'm no longer adapting to spaces, I'm gonna create what the space is gonna look like for me. So now when I go into spaces, I think, well, what can I do differently? I remember one day I was here in DC and I was leaving a party and I couldn't get an Uber. So I said, I'm gonna walk home. And I really didn't know the area at all. And it was at 3 a.m. in the morning. And I had on tight clothing, tight jeans, but I was like, I'm gonna walk home. And what I told myself was I had to have confidence in the fact that I was where I belonged, right? And that I didn't think about, is this a safe space or not a safe space for me? I was just like, I'm gonna create and be safe and be confident that I will make it home, right? And that's what I really think we have to continue to do, is say, in this space, if we don't feel space, what does it look like to feel safe? How do I create that space? And how do I really demand that we're going to get there, right? Within the space that we're in. So I just really think about, how do we cultivate and create those spaces for us all year long, whatever that means. And Katy said something that was really great. It's about acknowledging that you have a partner, or even acknowledging I'm an avid dater and I've always been on teams of married people. So many times I'm like, well, let me tell you about my date last week, right? So you have to just go into a space and create the space that you want. And that's the only way we're going to be able to grow and get to a space where everyone feels like we belong. So, Katy.
Yeah, I think when I got to this question at the end, I was like, well, I'm me. I show up as me. I don't minimize me. I push my community to the front, my community as queer, as BIPOC, as disabled, as the folks that I create my personal community with. And so I think part of ensuring that Pride is acknowledged year round is being visible. Salome?
I think that for me, it's reminding people that Pride is everywhere. Reminding folks that they have queer people in their life, whether they know it or not. And also trying to, as many of us said earlier, make queer life just life. And sometimes that means I show up on a panel with rainbow hair. Sometimes that means I go to work and we're sitting around and I acknowledge what's happening in the space, where I'm like, I remember we went to a summit and we were getting random people in the summit to come to our hosted reception. And before I knew it, I had all the queer people at my table. And I was like, well, I guess this is the queer table over here, and just said it loud enough to where people felt awkward that we were like kind of off on our own and wanted to meet those people too. And so I think it's making the space in a way that is unapologetic, that reminds others in this space that queerness exists around them, to the point where it doesn't make them uncomfortable. Because I think that oftentimes when people think about queerness and LGBTQI+, it's how do I make them comfortable? And it's like, nah, sometimes we're comfortable. You're the one that's not. And you gotta sit with that. And how do we make sure that when we create space that we're making folk acknowledge that they're uncomfortable to a point where queerness becomes comfortable for them. I know that it is a really big feat. And so I just focus on the people in my life, whether it be the folks at my job or my own family. And it does result in some funny jokes. I definitely feel like the fun part about me coming out to my siblings was I have all brothers. And so once they recognized that their sister was bisexual and pan, they're like, oh, we can talk about girls with our sister? Oh, come on over. Let's now I get the invite to the strip club. Now I get the invite to sit with the guys at the table and talk about cute girls now. And it brought us closer together. And I think that trying to push those spaces into the greater space in general is how we celebrate year round, and just reminding folks that we don't go away after June is done.
I think that's so important. I think that intentionality How are we going to be sure to center queerness in different things in our community, in our spaces? I'm going to take this question that came through in the Q&A, which is really great, and ask all of you. Intersectionality is becoming an increasingly bigger topic. For those that identify as BIPOC and LGBTQIA+, what's the most important thing that they want their colleagues, leaders to know about the unique challenges in today's work environments? And what can we do better to create more workspaces of belonging for those that identify as both? I don't know if he's feeling that more.
I'm gonna volunteer DeAngelo to go first.
Great. I was like, I need to read the question so I can digest it really quickly. Yes. So I was like rereading the question here. So let me get to the question first, and then we can go. Katie's taking notes. She's being very good over there and intentional.
Well, I'll take a crack at it since DeAngelo's still reading it. So I think for me, one thing that I want folks to take away is recognizing that there is that intersection, and that intersection can either be really beautiful or really troubling or really scary or all of those things at one time. I think that the more intersections that someone has, the more intentional you'll have to be with building a relationship with that person if you want the relationship to be full and enriching for both people involved. I think that the takeaway I really want people to really consider is just, do you see that person holistically with all those identities at once? Because they exist within all those identities at once all the time. And I think just being really intentional is what I want people to take away from that, is when you look at that person, when you look at me or that person in your life, just recognizing that all those intersections are colliding at the same time every second of the day for that person. And how can you connect with them? Because that's kind of what all people really want, is just to feel connection to someone else, to have community. And so that intentionality goes a long way.
Yeah, Salome, I will say to you that yeah, everything you said, they're colliding every day. Because to be honest with you, I think some days I'm like, as much as I want to be married, many days I'm still always thinking about, will I make it there? Or can I just get past a traffic stop, right? So the intersectionality of being Black first and then being gay, and what shows up first every day is your Blackness, and then you have to negotiate your gayness sometimes. So it's those two things are existing and working through our minds each and every day. And so while someone else is working with that, we are dealing with it. So it's like you said, hold space for that. Give us some grace for that. Give us a moment. Don't ask us to speak for everyone, because we're speaking with all of this collidedness in our head, right? So we're just gonna give you the best answer based on our personal experiences. But yeah, that's what I would say. Katie, what's your thoughts on it?
I don't think the question was for me.
And that's how you live your morals in real life, people. Look at Katie.
Way to go, Katy Byrtus. Way to go. Oh my goodness. We are pretty much coming close to time here. So as a female, lesbian, Asian person in this world, all at the same time, but never really at once, I'd like to say thank you to our panelists for being here today, for sharing your insights and lived experiences and program resources that we could all take a page from. And as the celebration of Pride Month also marks the significance of the historical Stonewall riots, where people from the gay community stood up in response to a police raid in, is this Greenwich Village, Lower Manhattan, New York City. They fought. Their demonstrations were met with riots when the police became violent and our community fought back. Hands down, they marked the beginning of our liberation movement for equal rights in this country, as well as rights of various key members of our community today here in the US and globally. So let's celebrate Pride by keeping this in mind. Every human being is allowed to choose what they want and who they love. And at the end of the day, love is love. On behalf of my wife, Crystal, our panelists, Katy, DeAngelo, Salome, PDXWIT, and our sponsor host, First Tech. Happy Pride, everyone. Love will keep us together. Be love, do love, just do all of it. And also at the end of the day, just like my background says, fight, always fight. Stay strong, everyone. See you all in the next Pride activity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. So glad you're here.